The cross refused to burn. It stood alone in the center of the ruin, a black silhouette against the bruised pre-dawn sky over Pittsburgh. The air, thick with the smell of wet ash and chemical foam, carried the sound of dripping water and the groan of cooling metal. Everything else was a skeleton. The parish hall's roof was a hollowed-out ribcage, its walls a scatter of broken teeth. But the cross, a simple dark thing of hewn timber, was untouched, not just standing, but whole. Soot dusted its surface like a fine powder, but the grain of the wood was visible beneath, unblistered and unbowed. It was the only vertical thing left in a world knocked horizontal, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence of destruction. Michael Kenrick was a firefighter, which meant his job was to stare into the heart of obliteration and not flinch. He stood with his helmet in his hand, the leather of his gloves stiff with water and grit. His lungs tasted of smoke, and his eyes, raw from the heat, fixed on that impossible shape. The world had just ended for this building, but one piece of it had not gotten the message. His apartment in Polish Hill was a place of straight lines and hard surfaces. From his third-floor window, the great steel arches of the 31st Street Bridge spanned the Allegheny River, a testament to order and engineering. Michael saw only the space between the girders, the empty air that held it all up. He had lived in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, his entire life, and had once seen its bridges as promises of connection. Now they were just structures. He ran a hand over his face, the rasp of his stubble a familiar friction. The room was sparse, almost monastic, but without the peace. A single bed, a metal-framed table, 2 chairs. Dust motes danced in the slanted morning light, each a tiny world of chaos he could do nothing to control. It was here he came to be alone with the silence that had taken up residence inside him. The silence had started 2 years ago. It had a weight and a texture, a coldness that seeped from his bones and cooled the air around him. He did his job at Station 39 with a grim efficiency that his captain mistook for focus. He went through the motions of a life, breathing, eating, sleeping, but the engine inside had seized. His faith had not just been lost, it had been dismantled piece by piece, leaving behind a husk. His wife, Maria, had believed in the architecture of the unseen. She saw meaning in the flight of a bird, in the way light fell across the pews at St. Stanislaus Kostka Church. Michael had believed in her. When she got sick, he had tried to believe in her God, too. He had built a cathedral of prayer in the sterile quiet of a hospital room, a desperate structure of bargains and pleas. He remembered the exact shade of white on the walls at UPMC Mercy Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It was a flat, unforgiving white that swallowed light and offered no comfort. The rhythmic electronic sigh of the ventilator became the only hymn he heard, a machine's metronome counting down the seconds he had left with her. He knelt by her bed, his large, calloused hands holding her pale, delicate one, and prayed until his throat was raw. He prayed to a small plastic crucifix taped to the wall above her head. He begged it, argued with it, reasoned with it. He made promises he had no intention of keeping if only it would grant him this one thing. He would build a church with his bare hands. He would walk to Rome. He would be a better man. The crucifix offered only its silent, molded shape. The silence that answered him was not peaceful. It was a void, an active, pressing nothingness. When Maria's hand went limp in his, the beeping of the machines flattened into a single sustained note that cut through the world. The doctors spoke in low, respectful tones, their words of condolence turning to static in his ears. He looked at the plastic cross on the wall and felt a coldness that had nothing to do with grief. It was the coldness of a locked door. The final audible word she had whispered was a name that wasn't his. Jesus, she had breathed, a sound like a leaf falling. That was the foundation of the silence inside him. He hadn't just lost Maria. He had lost the entire invisible world she had inhabited. The bridges of Pittsburgh were just steel and rivets, holding up nothing but asphalt and cars. The sky was just a collection of gases, and a cross was just 2 pieces of wood held together by a nail. The call came at 3:47 a.m., a 4-alarm fire at the old parish center next to St. Anthony's Chapel in Troy Hill. Michael's crew was second on the scene. The building was already a tower of orange against the black sky, a giant, angry flower blooming in the dark. Flames chewed through the century-old timber frame, spitting embers onto the narrow streets. He moved on instinct, his body a machine trained for this precise brand of chaos. He pulled on his mask, the hiss of the regulator filling his ears, and advanced with the line into the furnace. The heat was a physical blow, a pressure that pushed against his chest and face. Inside, the world was a roaring, blinding cataract of fire and smoke. They fought it for 3 hours. Water cannons blasted the exterior, while teams like his worked the perimeter, containing the spread. The roof collapsed with a deafening crash, a dragon sighing its last fiery breath, the air filled with a storm of sparks that died as they hit the wet asphalt of Troy Hill Road. The structure was a total loss. By 6:15 a.m., the fire was out. The slow, dirty work of overhaul began, dousing hot spots and searching the wreckage. Michael stood with his axe in hand, steam rising from his turnout gear. The rising sun cast a weak, gray light over the scene. The captain called for a searchlight to cut through the smoke still clinging to the ruin. A rookie firefighter, a kid named Diaz, was the one who saw it first. He was playing the beam of his light over the smoldering debris in the center of what used to be the main hall. The light stopped. It held steady on a single, upright form. "Cap," Diaz said, his voice tight. "You gotta see this!" The beams from 3 other lights converged on the spot. A hush fell over the crew, the only sounds the crackle of dying embers and the hiss of water from a leaking hose. Someone's Halligan tool slipped from their grasp, hitting the pavement with a sharp clang that made everyone jump. In the center of the devastation, black with soot but standing tall and straight, was the cross. The sun was fully up now, a pale wafer in the hazy Pittsburgh sky. Yellow tape cordoned off the block, and behind it, a crowd had started to form. Neighbors in bathrobes, early commuters on their way to work, people drawn by the columns of smoke that still rose from the blackened bones of the parish hall. They stood in silence, phones held up to capture the impossible image. Whispers moved through the crowd like a breeze. It was a miracle, a sign. The words passed from person to person, gathering weight and certainty. News vans from KDKA and WPXI arrived, their satellite dishes rising to broadcast the image across the city. The cross in the rubble was no longer just an object. It was a story. Michael finished his report, his hand moving automatically across the page, documenting the time, the equipment used, the extent of the damage. He didn't write about the cross. That wasn't part of the official record. He handed the clipboard to his captain, who took it without looking at him, his own eyes still fixed on the scene. "Go home, Kenrick," the captain said, his voice gravelly. "Get some rest." Driving home over the 16th Street Bridge, Michael saw the news on a giant electronic billboard, a photo of the cross, stark and undeniable. He felt nothing. He told himself he felt nothing. It was an anomaly, a fluke of physics, a pocket of air, a certain type of treated wood, a dozen things could explain it. But the image followed him. It was reflected in his rearview mirror, superimposed over the faces of other drivers. It was waiting for him in the gray concrete of his apartment building. For 3 days, Michael existed in a fog. He was on mandatory leave after the fire, a standard procedure. He should have been sleeping, recovering. Instead, he paced the floor of his small Polish Hill apartment, the image of the cross seared onto the inside of his eyelids. It was there when he closed his eyes, a dark shape against a red background of fire. He felt a tightness in his chest, a familiar pressure he knew wasn't from smoke. It was the weight of the silence, heavier now than ever. He tried to eat, but the food tasted like ash. He tried to watch television, but the flickering images were meaningless noise. The city outside his window went on with its life, but he was trapped in the aftermath of 3:47 a.m. His sister called. He saw her name on the screen and let it go to voicemail. His captain called. He did the same. He sat in the dark, the city lights of Pittsburgh painting patterns on his wall. He was isolated on an island of his own making, the memory of the fire the only thing for miles. Day 3, 11:18 p.m. He stood at his window, watching the relentless flow of headlights on the highway below. He felt a tremor in his hands, a low hum of energy with nowhere to go. The rational part of his brain, the part that understood physics and combustion, kept offering explanations for the cross. They felt thin, like excuses. Another part of him, a part he thought had died in that hospital room, was stirring. It was a faint, unsettling pulse beneath the surface of his exhaustion. He couldn't stay here any longer. He grabbed his keys. He drove back to Troy Hill. The streets were empty now, the news crews and onlookers long gone. He parked a block away and walked toward the yellow tape. The air still held a faint, sharp scent of char. He slipped under the tape, his feet crunching on the gritty debris that littered the street. The sight was a landscape of shadows, shapes made monstrous by the dim glow of the streetlights, and in the center of it, the cross. It was darker than the darkness around it, a solid piece of night. He walked toward it, his steps slow and deliberate, the only sound in a sleeping world. He stopped a few feet away, standing in the cold ashes of what had been. He was a firefighter, a man who walked into fires, but he was afraid to get any closer. Then the world fell silent. Not quiet, but silent. The distant hum of the city, the rustle of wind in the trees, the sound of his own breathing, it all vanished. It was a profound, absolute stillness, a silence so deep it felt like a presence. He stood frozen, every nerve ending alive. A scent cut through the sterile smell of ash. It was clean and sweet, the impossible fragrance of fresh-cut roses in the dead of a cold night. It was Maria's scent. He remembered it from the small garden she kept, from the single rose she would place in a vase on their kitchen table. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked up at the cross. The moon, which had been hidden behind a thick blanket of clouds, broke free. A single, pure shaft of silver light fell directly upon the ruin, illuminating the cross. The wood, caked in soot, seemed to absorb the light, glowing with a soft, internal luminescence. It wasn't wood anymore. It was a vessel. Across the street, on the second floor of a brick house on Harpster Street, an old woman named Elzbieta Novak pulled back her lace curtain. She hadn't been able to sleep. From her window, she saw a soft, gentle light pulsing in the heart of the wreckage, a light that seemed to breathe. It was a holy light, a quiet candle in a vast darkness. She made the sign of the cross and watched, her eyes filled with tears. The light, the scent, the silence. They dismantled him. All the walls he had built, all the cynical armor he had welded around his heart, it all came apart, not in a violent crash, but in a quiet, inexorable surrender. The coldness inside him, the hard knot of grief and anger he had carried for 2 years, finally broke. A sound tore from his throat, a raw, ragged sob that was swallowed by the immense silence around him. He fell to his knees in the ash and mud. The fight was over. He wasn't praying for anything, not asking for a sign or a bargain. He was just kneeling. His shoulders shook, and tears cut clean paths through the grime on his face. He reached out a trembling hand, his firefighter's glove stained with the memory of 100 other fires. He laid his palm against the base of the cross. The wood was cool and solid beneath the layer of soot. With his sleeve, he gently wiped away some of the black dust, revealing the deep, unburned grain of the oak beneath. It was a small act, a gesture of care in a place of total destruction. His fingers brushed against something hard and sharp in the debris. He picked it up. It was a single hand-forged nail, its head blackened and its body slightly bent from the heat. He closed his fist around it, the point pressing into his palm. He held it tight, a piece of solid, painful reality. It was a thing that holds other things together. The first light of dawn found him there, still kneeling. The silence had receded, and the sounds of the city were returning. A distant train horn, the rumble of the first garbage truck, The scent of roses was gone, replaced again by the smell of cold smoke. But something had changed. The air in his lungs felt different, lighter. The change wasn't loud. It was a quiet shift in the city's spirit, a ripple spreading from the ashes in Troy Hill. A teenager who lived on the block, a boy known for spray painting walls and sitting sullenly on front stoops, was the first to arrive at the site that morning. He came with a garbage bag, and without a word to anyone began picking up the wind-strewn litter that had collected along the police tape on Troy Hill Road. He worked for an hour, his face unreadable, before disappearing as quietly as he had come. Down in the Strip District, a historic market neighborhood bustling with morning commerce, a barista at La Prima Espresso Co. saw a man she recognized huddled in a doorway. He was a veteran who panhandled on the corner, a man whose eyes she usually avoided. Today, she poured an extra coffee, walked it outside, and handed it to him. "It's a cold one," she said, the only explanation she could offer for the warmth spreading through her own chest. Michael went back to Station 39. He walked into the equipment bay, where his captain was inspecting an air hose. He didn't offer a long explanation or a dramatic speech. He just picked up a clean rag and began polishing the chrome on the side of the engine. The captain watched him for a long moment. "You ready to come back?" he asked. Michael met his gaze, his own eyes clear for the first time in years. "I'm ready, Cap." It was enough. The silence within Michael was gone. In its place was a quiet presence, a stillness that listened. He was still a firefighter. He still walked into burning buildings and faced down chaos. But now he carried something else with him. He was the last man to leave a scene, staying long after the hoses were packed to talk to a family who had lost everything, his presence a calm anchor in their storm. The parish decided not to rebuild the hall. Instead, with donations that poured in from all over Pittsburgh and beyond, they created a small, quiet memorial garden on the site. It was a place of stone benches, resilient grasses, and at its heart, the fire-stained wooden cross, mounted on a simple stone plinth. It became a destination, a place where people came to sit in silence. Michael visited often. He would sit on one of the benches after a long shift, the nail he'd found that night a cool weight in his pocket. One afternoon, the old parish priest, Father Thomas, sat down beside him. "You know the story of that cross?" the priest asked, his voice gentle. Michael shook his head. "It was carved over a century ago by a steel worker from the old Jones and Laughlin plant," Father Thomas said, gazing at the cross. "He made it from a beam he salvaged from the first St. Nicholas Church when it burned down in 1898. This isn't the first fire it has survived. Sometimes the structures we build, the ones of wood and stone, are destined to fall. They burn, they crumble, they return to the earth. But the things that cross represents, faith, resilience, the stubborn hope that holds a community together, can withstand any fire. It was never about the wood. It was about the hands that carved it and the belief that guided them. That simple wooden cross stood for something that cannot be consumed by flame. The enduring truth that even in the midst of total devastation, something good can remain. Not just remain, but stand tall, a symbol for everyone to see. It teaches us that what is essential is invisible to the eye and untouchable by the fire. If this story touched you, like the video, subscribe to, and share it with someone who needs hope today. Tell us your moment of unexpected grace in the comments.